point.
Hey there, welcome to episode number 33 of Killer POV. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rob G. from FEARnet and Icons of Fright. Joining me as always is Elric Kane from Inside Horror.
That's where I'm from.
That's yeah.
But now I'd rather be said I'm from here.
Elric Kane from Killer POV
is scruffy today. Have you noticed this?
I'm gonna grow a beard for October.
I'm kind of
like
scruffy too.
The Elric that slept on the street.
I'm the lumberjack.
Yeah, this is Adam Barnick in disguise. That's
right.
what I think it is.
Lumberjack.
It's very surly kind of cute.
Well, okay, I'm going to be honest with you guys. You want to know what I'm doing for Halloween?
What?
I'm going to be AJ Bowen.
Whoa.
I'm kidding. But
so the beard is begun.
The beard was no,
but he doesn't
kidding.
have a beard anymore.
His beard's way cooler than mine. I have weird patches missing.
I see.
I
can see him. Oh my gosh, you are
little patches.
You're splotchy.
Yeah, it's a little splotchy.
Does it come in eventually when it's like a full beard?
I don't know. Yeah, the rest gets so long you wouldn't know.
I see. All right.
We'll see. I always say I'm growing a beard, and then a week later it's gone.
You're like, enough of that. Also with us, of course, is Rebekah McKendry from Fangoria.
Greetings, gents. And you
she's
have
eating-
a beard too.
Wait. Happy birthday to
that's
you.
right.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you.
She's the same age as me now. She caught up. Woo.
I did.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You guys are what, 22, 23?
21.
Yeah.
I went bar crawling last night. It was crazy. Yeah.
So what'd you watch
good.
on your birthday? That's always the key. What film did somebody watch on their birthday?
Yeah.
I watched Ticks last night.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, because
All of Twitter knows that.
I know. I announced it. It was like, well, it was a very sad day yesterday. I had such a crap day yesterday. It was a lot of different factors. And then I finally made it to the Scream Fest red carpet. And by that time, I had this ridiculous stomach ache and I had a headache. And I was just like, I'm done. I didn't even stay for Scream Fest. I went home, I put on PJs and I watched Ticks. And that was like the best part of my birthday.
Wow.
See, and somebody was asking me why I hadn't seen it, and it was the Seth Green factor. It's not even that I don't like Seth Green. It's not even that. It's not against Seth Green. Seth Green's cool. It's just there's something when I see his face on a certain video box from a certain time, I'm kind of like not interested. And so I, for a long time, haven't been interested in seeing that film. But and I thought Brian Yuzna directed it all this time.
No,
and so
it's Tony Randall.
Yeah, so today when I looked it up and I saw Tony Randall did it, nothing against Yuzna, but Tony Randall did Hellraiser 2, which is, one of the great sequels. So now I'm like, all right, I'll watch
plus,
it.
K&B did the effects.
Yeah.
That's like the best part. And that is also my inclusion for this week's FEARnet Unseen. So you can read all about it.
I will watch it. I'll try to watch it by next week.
I may have to invite you guys over for a Sunday night viewing of Ticks. Rob, have you seen it before?
I haven't. I'd love to see it.
Okay, that's it. There's a Sunday night viewing at my house for watching Ticks. We may have to follow it up with the baby's room, so clear like a 3-hour chunk,
boy.
gentlemen.
Oh, no.
It's going to be a hell of a night.
There's so many screenings this month. I don't know how we'll fit it in.
It's happening,
so many
guys.
movies.
It's happening. I didn't have a birthday party, so I'll have this instead.
Wow.
So,
all right. Fair
for
enough.
my birthday party, I actually, because October was so crazy, I was like, I really can't find time to fit in anything. Like we thought about doing a screening at Jump Cut, and Dave was like, let's have people over at the house. But it was just, there was not a single night where there wasn't something going on already that I would be pulling people away from. So sometime in November, I'm treating a whole bunch of people to go see Rocky Horror, the Midnight Show.
Wow.
Because you guys have never seen it live, which is just a shame.
Well, I saw like 20 minutes of it live, but that doesn't count.
Hopefully, even after the end of November, I still won't have seen it live.
No. You're coming with.
Come on, we
You're
gotta
coming
give it a
with.
It can't be as good as
Rebekah.
Reanimator, the musical.
Oh, that's true.
I don't know. It's pretty. It's
love
a
Re-Animator.
completely different thing, and it is something that you need to experience. Just because, as a horror fan, there are films that unite the audience, and then there are films where it's like this, where it is this completely organic beast that has this rhizomatic structure where the only way you can learn about what to do at a live screening is from somebody else. I mean, it's not like there's a videotape or a magazine somewhere where you can read about all the things that you're supposed to do or say. But as you'll see when you're there, the entire audience will say things at the exact same time for a full 2-hour duration.
But the quality must fluctuate from group to group who do it around the country or world, right?
It does, because I used to go to it in DC and New York all the time, and these were like top-notch casts. But then I saw it in this tiny little town in North Carolina when I was at a convention there. And they were like, man, you know all the lines. And I was like, I do. Suddenly I'm like the awesome one there.
Yeah.
So
from now on, we call her the awesome one.
The awesome
you are
one.
the awesome one.
I'll take that over the Sallow of people.
Yeah,
that's
we done with that
She is the awesome Sallow of people.
Speaking of Re-Animator the musical, I got to go to Not Scary Farm with Herbert West from that show.
I saw your pictures.
Graham Skipper.
Cool.
Yeah.
I love Graham. He is amazing.
I went to that like 10 years ago and had a blast.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever gone. I've only usually done Universal Horror Nights, but I loved it. I loved it, and it's everyone's like, oh, which one is better? Like, you can't really. They're kind of apples and oranges. I mean, the thing about Universal is it's got a lot of money behind it. It's a big corporate event. It's got licensing for known titles. But the thing I liked about Knott's was it was like a dozen mazes, and I did not know what to expect from any of them. One of them was called Forevermore, and it was all based on like Poe stuff. Like there's like a whole like backstory where there's this murderer killing people in the style of Poe stories. No, it's not The Following, but it's its own. It was its own maze. There was a maze about Houdini. There was some really cool stuff, and it's like that's the thing. Like I was able to get a little more into it and be a little scared, a little more on edge because it wasn't Evil Dead the Maze where I knew what was coming and that sort of thing. So I loved it.
Yeah, I went last year and reviewed it for Fango, and I said in my review that Knott's had more heart. That it was like Universal, they had money, look, we have the props from the original Thing remake that we just did and things like that. And it was big and flashy. But when I went, there was one that was like a walk through a butcher shop. And then they had a clown one, and then they had a haunted slumber party. And it was such a cool little thing because they were very small and they were very self-contained.
Well, that's a different expectation, right? Like, so if you walk into something called the Insidious Maze, or especially people like us, you're going in already not there to enjoy it as much as you are there to almost think about it and go, oh, that looked good, or that compare and contrast, and you're already in your brain not experiencing something. Well, so that's a good.
It was funny. We were walking into one. I'm gonna get the name wrong. I think it was like Pinocchio Unleashed or Pinocchio's Revenge.
Charles Band made that one.
Oh my god! We were online, and Graham was like, "Hurry, let's do it. Let's get on this maze before Charles Band makes a movie out of it."
I'd totally go to a Charles Band maze. That would be awesome.
That would.
God knows what you would get out of that.
Actually, we should give him that idea.
Castle Freak.
Yeah.
Stuart Gordon.
Maze, I love it. Yeah. So I'm still trying to get Charles Band on the show. I have to keep on him about that.
It will happen.
I have finished my pineapple.
Our guest tonight might help us there, so we'll get to that soon.
We'll put in a word for us.
Yeah.
Rebecca, you see anything else this week?
I saw Contamination. 1981, directed by Louis Cozzi, but he directed films in the U.S. as, Luigi Cozzi, but he directed films here under Louis Coates. And had Ian McCullough in it. Okay. But it's really gory, but really boring. It was the coolest part was that Goblin did the soundtrack. It's about alien pods and alien eggs that land on Earth.
Everyone's sold now. They're just like Goblin soundtrack.
I know, Goblin soundtrack is hyper gory. But the actresses, it's one of those Italian films where they shot it in New York City, parts of it in New York City. And they used Italian actresses and actors, but dubbed them in English. And both the audio and the actual performances are both so, there are aliens here. We should do something about them. It's just the most bland, monotone thing you've ever seen. So it's hard not to fall asleep. But then the symptom of being around the aliens and being infected by them is that your chest burst open. And like aliens times like 50, where like there's intestines flying everywhere. So that part's awesome. And there's Goblin, who I'm going to see in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
so I'm
Which one? Same one. Yeah, that's right.
I'm on the Wednesday night show.
That's Tenebrae?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I hear from the early reports from New York, it looks like people are saying like it's crazier than any heavy metal concert they've ever been to.
Wow.
And so the actual concert part sounds pretty out of control.
I'm going to punch somebody. So. It's happening, guys.
The funny thing is, I don't even care about I've seen these movies. I don't care about that. I just care about the concert.
Goblin, that's the important. I mean, it's the first time they toured the U.S.
Yeah, it wouldn't have mattered which film they put it with.
Great, but it could have been like.
Well, it could be DVD for all we know.
The card player. I think they advertised it as 35 millimeter. But 35 millimeter, didn't they?
I
think they did.
So yeah, I guess I would assume they're bringing film prints. But the sell for me was I ended up going for the slightly special package. It's like $30 more, and you get to go into the rehearsal, meet and greet with the band, and then and then the show. And the reason being is because Lawrence over at FEARnet, we were talking about. I was like, oh, I don't need to do that whole special thing, and he's like, do you understand this is Goblin? He's like, I'm going to take a picture with the band, and it'll be my Facebook header forever. I'm like, I want a picture with Goblin too. Yeah, I think that's worth the extra $30.
Yeah,
that's funny.
So just for the Facebook picture.
How does Boswell? Because I've met and interviewed Simon Boswell before, and I know he's not in Goblin, but he's played with Goblin, right? On some scores like I know Demons 2, Phenomena. are all Simon Boswell. I have to, if anyone's an expert on the bands and those kind of music, I'm very curious how they all kind of fit together.
Next week.
Yeah, maybe
we'll have an expert
I
on
would
next
assume
week.
Chris Alexander might know
might
this,
know
but we do have
Boswell's
an expert
great too,
coming on next week that would know this answer.
Very cool.
What did you see, Elric?
I'll go quick. We both saw The Skull.
I forgot about that.
A beautiful, really gorgeous print, Technicolor print.
Technicolor, yeah.
Very nicely made film. It's a well-made film. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't.
This is just saying because there's like 5 movies called The Skull. This is the one with
Peter Cushing.
1952, and I was jealous as hell that you guys got to see it. I had to stay home and babysit because my husband and I did a coin toss for who got to go.
Yeah.
And I lost the coin.
Yeah, but
toss,
he was the bigger Peter Cushing.
He is. He has this like Peter Cushing is pimp.
I do think he's one of the best actors
so.
because especially given the films he had to be in, he's just always thinking. Like the close-ups on his face in that film, even when he's doing something kind of ridiculous, he just seems intelligent, thinking. I know he's a really impressive actor, and there's a couple scenes where nothing's really happening. They're playing like billiards, which no one knows how to play billiards. But Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing are playing, and you're just complete. I found them to be the most riveting scenes.
Oh, yeah.
Just two guys talking about the supernatural.
Yeah, that's how good they both are.
Yeah, they both really kicked ass. But it was a lot of fun. I mean, the experience of seeing that outside at Mike's house, it was great. And then I caught up on World War Z because somebody had mentioned it wasn't as bad as we thought. I was like kind of really floored on how not bad it was because I really kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
There was like one scene in the middle with an airplane thing which was just a little too like unbelievable, even though it asked a little too much of me. But the opening 10 minutes I thought were phenomenal. Like I was totally floored by how it opened, and I thought it just had some really cool structure and story. I don't know. It was a movie I wasn't expecting anything from, and I was like, this is a good film.
Yeah.
And then I did go after the last show. I went to Wide of the Eye at Cinefamily, which held up. But the first 10 minutes of that, I would say, are probably my favorite murder in the history of cinema.
Wow.
I think the first 10 minutes is the best murder scene I've ever seen. It's so fascinating, so beautifully art house shot. The rest of it holds up and is a crazy movie, but I don't, for horror fans, isn't as necessary as was in my brain.
Yeah.
You know?
How'd it play with the audience?
Good. It was packed. And we got a shout out, which was cool.
Nice.
Because the good Cinefamily people were on our show before. And I did want to mention one that I want to go to on Friday at midnight, Abby. The Black Exorcist. There's no way on earth I'm missing that film.
Her lover's the devil.
I've never seen that. And that's William Girdler, the guy we were talking about, who did Grizzly and did Manitou and a few other. I mean, just seems like a very odd. Looking at his filmography, I think there's never been a director I want to know more about than this guy. I'm kind of. I need to look deeper into his life. But and just finally, I wanted to mention for people, because I know a lot of people listen to our show and write down a lot of titles because we throw out a lot. We also love it when that happens to us, when we learn new things. And the blog Rupert Pupkin Speaks.
Yes.
We were all invited. We've probably mentioned this before, to do our top 5 underrated horror movies. I would really recommend anyone listening to this to just go follow that blog or follow his tweets, because every day in the last month, I've found something that I added to a list of films I wanted to see.
Plus, he's always tweeting deals for really, really good movie deals. Because of him, I bought a ton of stuff from Deep Discount. It was all the
T-shirts.
Not the T-shirts. It was God. Now I'm drawing a blank on the company. It's one of these companies that does limited edition stuff, and I wish I could remember. But they put out the Monster Squad, Cujo, The Perfect Weapon, which is an 80s action movie.
Cool.
And of course, I bought them all because they were discounted for a limited time.
Because you can't stop shopping.
Yeah. Well, that's true too.
Such a shop.
What's his Twitter name again?
I think it's Rupert.
It's Rupert Pupkin, isn't it?
Yeah. His real name's
Bob Freelander.
Brian Sal.
Bob Freelander. It is Bob Freelander.
Is the tweet?
You're right. You're right.
Twitter feed. Yeah. So shout out to him.
Yeah, and it's just, I'm really, for you guys, this isn't self-serving and he didn't ask us to do it. Seriously, every single time I see a list, some lists are more interesting than others. Some are a little more mainstream. Some are really out there. There's some VHS ones where you wouldn't have heard of any of the 5 movies.
Yeah, well, Phil Blankenship's, I didn't hear any of his.
That was insane because they were all from the 90s. And I was I'm sure I know at least half of these. Yeah. And I knew 10.
Yeah,
so
it was 90s A to Z.
Them.
So it was
There's one in particular that I've read on 2 lists and I'm just salivating.
Which
one?
It
looks so it's my kind of movie.
Yeah.
It's called The Black Room. It's from the 90s. It was shot on, it wasn't shot on video. It's set in the hills though, which is the cool thing. It's in the Hollywood Hills and it's somewhat of a vampiric thing. I've been looking on eBay. It looks like it costs about $40 to buy. The Black Room.
The Black Room.
It's one I've never heard of, and 2 of the people just love it. And so out of all the ones I've seen, I'm I looked at a few minutes. I was like, ooh, that looks like my kind of movie. So,
yeah.
But it's exciting. That's the thing about being into horror. you can't fake being interested in this stuff because it'll run out of steam after a couple months. You know what I mean? For those of us who really like just are always wanting to see new stuff, and that's why I'm into it. It's always to see new films and discover gems. And he has some great stuff.
I read Scott Derrickson's picks today.
Yeah, that was some good stuff.
He picked Last Winter by Fezzik, which I was.
Yeah, that's a cool pick.
Nice to see him get a little love. Yeah,
and people have to remember the word is underrated, and I think that's important. No one was talking about masterpieces necessarily or films that ever. I mean, sometimes you'll read some of this and it's like, come on, that's not underrated. Like, and even me putting something like Possession is not. Now it's not. now it's going to be rated. You know. There you go.
Because Dave and I have been working on this book for over a year now that we're contracted for, which is 150 Forgotten Horror Gems, and we've had the biggest debate with some of the people at the publishing house because they're like, you should put Street Trash on. And I'm like, well, that's not underrated. Everybody knows street trash, but it depends on which market you're looking at, according to them.
I think they're right. I mean, I think they're right. I think in our community, street trash, everyone knows it.
Everybody knows it.
But if you went outside, especially because of how it was distributed, and it was kind of in the shadow for a long time, he didn't want it out there.
Yeah.
And like you were saying on our show in episode 3?
4.
But I totally, I think there is a real slippery slope of a lot of titles that it's like we take for granted that they're kind of like Basket Case. Everyone's seen Basket Case, but
because like Ravenous was another one where I debated putting Ravenous on the list and then I took it off and they were like, oh no, Ravenous needs to be on there. And I'm like, but everybody knows it. But they keep explaining to me that what is a deep cut for me is not a deep cut for the rest of the world. So I guess I need to realize that.
Well, and it's probably about like the balance of you need the ones that will still help sell something.
Yeah.
But that said, I would love to read the book that you would naturally write where everything, 150 films even we haven't heard of. Because then that becomes like a little treasure map, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I could see maybe you can make a deal to do an online extra 50 that are like totally obscure. You know, it'd be cool. But you know, that doesn't always obscure and underrated doesn't always mean good.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because I can tell you now, I have a copy of The Black Exorcist. I don't want to say you're going to be disappointed.
I won't be disappointed. Not in a crowd.
It's not as cool as you think it's going to be.
But there are those movies, and I'm not saying we've talked about the So Bad You Good. I don't think it's that so much as the like, holy how did this
happen?
How did this happen? And seeing that in a crowd is pretty. It can be a pretty amazing experience depending on the film. But I haven't seen that one, and I wanted to see Tales from the Quad Dead in that, but I don't know if I can make it now on the day because the director's coming out, Charles Turner, which sucks. So yeah, a bunch of stuff. But really, to be honest, my October kind of starts the end of this week, and for the rest of the month, I've just got stuff.
Oh wow!
Every few days, there's stuff.
All of the films for Screamfest. So, are you guys going to any of them?
I'm thinking of doing Schism.
Schism's going to be a really good one.
That one's Adam Girosh and Jay Sanderson. And actually, a couple of years ago, I read the script for it, and I thought it was a really solid script. So it'll be interesting to see how it came out. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
I have to see 308 tomorrow, and then Torment, Schism. There's a whole bunch. So by next week, I should have a whole bunch of films to report on.
Cool. All right. And as far as I go, I told these guys before we started that I have some controversial shit to say. This is weird, you know, because the holidays here, I like to watch a lot of the classics, a lot of stuff that most people watch on Halloween, and then sometimes I like to delve into stuff I haven't seen before. But Friday night, I was home, had nothing to do, and I just got the Blu-rays for both Poltergeist and The Omen. So I did a nice little double feature of the original Omen, followed by Poltergeist. And it was, you know, look, both films are great for what they are, but I hadn't seen them in years. And dare I say, I don't like them very much anymore, if that makes any sense.
I think I still love Poltergeist.
Yeah, I mean, well, here's the thing. Before everyone jumps down my neck that's listening to this, it's not that I don't like, there's things about them I like, and I'll always remember the first time seeing it. But all right, The Omen, for example, I remember there was a big deal about it being remade back in 2006 because it was 06 was when it came out. But watching it again, you know, it's of its time. I was like watching it, like right off the bat, it's really hard a pill to swallow being like, all right, your wife lost a baby. We're just going to give you this strange baby and just pretend, don't tell your wife and just raise it as your own. And right off the bat, you're like, yeah, that's not going to work these days. I don't know about that.
I don't even remember that part.
Yeah,
I think it's playing, well, if this is on Friday, I think it's Friday it is Friday night. It's the night that this show will be live. It is playing at the Egyptian with the director in person.
Oh,
so
Richard Donner.
Richard Donner.
Is this part of the Beyond Fest?
Beyond Fest, yeah.
Okay.
So,
which I am Q&Ing a whole bunch of stuff for.
Yeah.
So
That's one of the ones. So if somebody, that would be a good chance to revisit it.
Yeah.
You know?
And I mean, look, it's a great movie, and I mean, David Warner's amazing in it.
He is, yeah.
He's got probably the best death sequence. No offense. Probably the best death sequence you're going to see in any movie of that era. It's still. I had to rewind it and watch it again and again.
What do you think about the remake?
You know what? I saw it when it came out, and I didn't think it was bad.
I remember kind of liking it.
Yeah, I kind of liked it too.
It was well made. Mia Farrow jumping on the person, and there's some pretty crazy stuff in there.
It wasn't exactly like, say, the Psycho remake where it was shot for shot, but it was pretty darn close.
Oh yeah, it was too close.
It
to the story,
deviate too much, but I like the actors.
It kept in my favorite part, which is I did it all for you, Damien. And that creeped the hell out of me as a kid, and that's one that I haven't seen it recently. I should go back and watch it, but
I'm really straying away from
it. Still shocks me.
Scary kid films. Like it's something I'm just like not that interested anymore. Like if there's a subgenre that I'm almost completely turned off by, and I thought Sinister was like the best made film of horror of the year it came out. And spoilers if you haven't seen Sinister, but it ends with something with kids. And for me, that was a bummer because I was really into it up until then. And so, but just every film now, when it ends with a scary kid or something, I just kind of like, I don't find kids. Sorry.
Interesting.
It could be having had a kid, maybe. It changed my viewpoint on just that. I mean, now that said, it's not impossible. Something like a poltergeist with a kid being kind of maybe possessed could still be creepy to me, but I don't know. Just, it's one of those subgenres I find maybe there's too many of them. The whole Children of the Damned type thing is just like Village of the Damned type thing. It's like Children of the Corn.
It's kind of funny because
I still don't mind those.
When Savage Steve Holland was on, he recommended a movie called The Other, which I bought at the time.
Which is awesome. That's the twin boys.
Yes, exactly. So I started watching it the other day, but like the trailer reel before you even get to the menu is like The Omen, The Good Son. It was like they're like playing all those type of trailers before that. I was like, oh wow, that's interesting marketing.
Yeah, that is interesting.
My favorite evil kids movie is The Children. If you guys have seen that, it came out like 5 years ago, and it came out very quietly and silently, and nobody saw it. But just such a good film. You should watch it.
I don't think I've seen that film.
It's about
is it a British filmmaker?
It's a British filmmaker. A couple of families go to this like desolate farmhouse together to celebrate Christmas. I don't remember if they're related or not, but it's like a couple of different families and they all have kids. And then gradually over the next couple of days, they start getting these flu-like symptoms. And then it progresses to dementia and the kids start trying to kill everybody. But it's not nearly as campy as it sounds. It is done so subtly. It's beautiful. And it's all in the snow.
Yeah, it was from 2008, and it was a Ghost House production.
Yeah.
Okay. I remember the cover.
I saw it once. It was on my top 10 of that year, but it was just so unsettling. And I mean, God bless you both for having kids. I definitely never want them, especially after that movie. So there's that. And then last, because I think our guest has arrived, and I don't want to keep him waiting too long. But yeah, Poltergeist. I hadn't seen it in a long time. I never loved it as much as some of the other movies of that era. I love the last 20 minutes, like the very ending bit of it, which to me feels like the most Tobe Hooper-esque part of it, like, all the bodies in the pool and all that stuff. The last 20 minutes is fantastic, and I like the characters in it. I like.
Yeah, they're a very likable family.
I like the family, I like that stuff, but I never particularly found it scary, except maybe for the clown thing. And it was funny because I was talking to a friend about this.
What age did you see it, just out of interest?
I can't remember because as a kid, and I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, the one I remember is 3. Because 3 was the one that was always on cable.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about that on the show, how we all kind of
and I went back and watched it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen it in a while, but I kind of prefer 3.
I don't know. I think, for me, Creepshow and Poltergeist are the 2 films, and then maybe Nightmare are the 3 that kind of made me, because I saw them at that young age. The clown thing, killed me. Yeah, I couldn't get into bed.
That's great.
So I'll always have a soft spot. I think there's something really great about the family, and there was a moment I watched. I didn't watch
smoking pot in bed together.
Yeah, I didn't watch it from the start recently, but I turned on TV and it was on, so I started watching it, and I think I tweeted about it. But it was like there was a scene where Marianne gets sucked into the closet, and then they're outside battling the tree, and they come back and looking for her, and they go to the something's covered in the closet, and they look inside, and she's not there, and the sister laughs. And to me, that was literally reminded me and this sounds really just bizarre, but why I love cinema. There was something so unexpected in that moment. Why is she laughing?
Yeah.
Her sister's gone, but it was so great. And a lot of people actually responded to that tweet because I think a lot of them had seen that moment. I had never seen that moment until that viewing. So I don't know, movies, that's the thing about classic movies. I get what maybe what you're saying in a way, because when I don't know if movies are meant to be revisited, perhaps.
Like they're remaking Poltergeist now, and you know what? I'm okay with it because I just watched the original. It's cool. They made 2 sequels. Like, why not? I'm all right with a newer, movie. So
as long as it's different, to me, the Evil Dead remake was different from the original.
That's what you got to do.
Just change it up. If you're going to do remakes. All
right, so I'm so excited. We're going to pause for 1 second and bring our guest in, and then get right to it.
Let's give you a clue. I'll say Poe adaptation is in the works, and
they're going to know. They're going to see the picture. They're going to see the description of the episode.
Yeah, but this is so much more fun. Don't ruin it. Don't step on it.
Show them in here.
Geek Nation's on my side. They're going to not show anything.
They're staring at his picture on the website right this second.
All right,
peering in.
We'll be back and Re-Animated in a second.
All right, so we're back. You know what, Elric, because you were so anxious to spoil who the guest was, I'm going to let you do this intro for once.
The director, you wouldn't have heard of any of his movies, so we'll just go to his theater production. Just kidding. He is Re-Animator the musical, most recently Re-Animator the musical, and
caught that one.
Truly one of, and people always will think when we have guests that we're going to be ass kissing, but genuinely one of the best things I've ever seen in my life live, and something that got me so just like excited about like theater and the crossover of like storytelling. Nevermore, An Evening with Edgar Allan Poe, is that the full title?
Yes.
Starring Jeffrey Combs, who also starred in our guest's most famous film, I guess, The Re-Animator. So welcome, Stuart Gordon.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So I mean, I guess we should start with Nevermore.
Yeah.
I guess.
We've all seen it, right?
Yeah. I just moved to LA. I actually saw it. It was one of the first. The thing I love about the show is I saw it, I think 3 or maybe 4 times, because I moved to LA about 4.5 years ago. Wow. And it was like the first week I moved here, you had started the show. And I was a big fan already. We had met briefly because Stuart was in my Psycho documentary, which you watched already. You haven't yet.
I haven't.
So I went to check out the show, and I always appreciated Jeffrey Combs as an actor.
But I've had the same conversation. This is funny.
But I feel like we get spoiled and forget how good he is, because then we'll see him on all these television shows and all that kind of stuff.
He is amazing.
Well, yes,
he is amazing.
Star Trek, but again, that's range. It's most actors aren't given any real range or latitude, right? Once somebody discovers you can do something well, they make Jeffrey, like the Frighteners and Re-Animator are a certain type. But I couldn't believe when I walked out of that theater what he had done.
And that's why I felt compelled to go back and see it more than once, is because, I mean, I'm always in awe of actors in general. Like I'm friends with quite a few of them. And in particular, AJ, like I worked on something with him, and he memorized like 10 pages of dialogue in like a day and just did it in all these different ways. And I'm like, wow, that is something that I am incapable of doing. So the first time I saw Nevermore,
that's what makes someone a director, not an actor.
Yeah, thank God for actors. So the first time I saw Nevermore, and I just watched Jeffrey pull off that performance. I can't remember. I think it was like maybe 20, 30 minutes into it when he's reciting like The Raven or some poem. I'm like, dear God, you have to memorize all these Poe poems and stories, and he's just, and he's given it his all every night. So to me, I was just so fascinated by his performance, and it made me appreciate him as an actor more than I ever did before. And to the point where then I brought more friends. I was like, you guys got to see this show, because it's like a one-man show. So yeah, it was fantastic. So that was my experience seeing it.
What drew you to adapting, and you adapted this with Paoli as well?
Yes. Well, we had done an episode for the Masters of Horror in which Jeffrey played Poe. It was an adaptation of The Black Cat, and we made Poe the protagonist of the story.
Featuring the same nose, right? He kept the prosthetic nose.
Right, he did. The same costume as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was so amazing as Poe. I kind of started feeling like I was hanging out with Edgar Allan Poe when we were shooting it. And we started saying, wouldn't it be great to do this live on stage where an audience can be in the same room with Poe? And then we started, researching his recitals, and, the ones that he gave towards the end of his life, where he would recite The Raven and tell a story. And he usually did them by candlelight, actually. And, that was how the project came together. And it was for Poe's bicentennial in 2009 that we did the play.
What do you think Jeff connected to, and how does he stay connected to do it for such a long period of time? Was it saying about the man or his work that you think he...
Well, he's very, drawn to Poe, to his work and also his life. I mean, when you start reading a biography of Poe, it's like one of his stories. I mean, this poor kid, was orphaned at the age of 2, raised by foster parents who were very wealthy, and then ran away and joined the army, and ended up marrying his 13-year-old cousin.
Right.
I mean, it's just all these crazy things. And then, he had such a hard time of it. He had a drinking problem. He kept, he was like his own worst enemy. He would constantly lose his jobs. Just a fantastic guy. And then even his own death, he died at the age of 40, mysteriously. No one knows what happened. He disappeared for several days.
Yeah, I always thought that would have made the most logical, if somebody was going to make a film, because it's great because, at least that way no one can counteract what you say about the last week of Poe. But do you have any feelings, like gut feelings from, because you guys probably research more than most people.
There's all these different, theories, but the one that I think makes the most sense, because one of the things that's strange about his disappearance was when they found him, he was wearing someone else's clothes.
Right.
And he had no identification, and that seemed so bizarre. And what they think might have happened, they know that there was an election going on in Baltimore, which is where this, he disappeared. And they used to take these guys, drunks, from polling place to polling place and have them vote over and over again as different people and put different clothes on them. And that's what they think may have happened to Poe, that there were these gangs of these sort of pollsters who kind of took him along and got him, kept feeding him alcohol, and to the point where he ended up dying of alcohol poisoning.
It's a good idea for the Tea Party. if you're listening, guys, you could use it.
Well, I come from Chicago. And
okay, right, yeah.
This is just one
of
the
common tactic.
Yeah, it is. Vote often is one of the
yeah, that's right.
Well, one of the interesting aspects of even going back to the Black Cat, if I recall correctly, didn't you want to put Jeffrey in your first episode of Masters of Horror, but something happened that he couldn't be in it, so then you brought him on board for Black Cat?
No,
something like that. I thought he was going to be in the first episode you did.
Dreams of the Witch House?
Dreams of the Witch House.
I thought maybe I read something like that. Like maybe a cameo or something. I don't know.
No, but I, we were talking about Poe, for a long time before this, and then the idea of doing the Black Cat. My daughter is a high school English teacher, and every Halloween I go to her class and talk about Poe. And one year I read The Black Cat to the class and scared the crap out of them.
I'd buy that CD, by the way. You should read Black Cat.
That story is so disturbing. And I realized reading it to them that it's been made into films a million times, but they've never had the nerve to do it the way Poe wrote it.
Right.
And so that was sort of the beginning. And then the idea, knowing that Jeffrey wanted to play Poe, putting him in as the protagonist, because the character in the story is a drunk who is normally a very nice guy, but when he gets loaded, he turns into a monster. And that seems a lot like the real Poe himself. It's written in the first person. So we developed it as for the Masters of Horror, and that led to Nevermore, the play.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you expect Nevermore to, when did you realize that Nevermore was kind of something special? Because I remember it being just for a couple of weekends or something like that, and then you guys extended it, and then you guys ended up doing it for quite a while.
Yeah, originally I think it was a 4-week run is what we announced, and we were sort of crossing our fingers hoping that we'd make it through the 4 weeks, because, the idea of going to see a play where someone is going to be reading poetry, that's not...
It's a tough pitch nowadays.
Yeah, it's a hard sell. Yeah, it really is. But it being Poe, it changes everything.
Well, I mean, the telltale heart when he tells the story. I mean, I think the thing about reading, Lovecraft and Poe, they're totally different. Is sometimes they're hard to read now. For people raised in our generation, and when I saw him deliver a telltale heart, it was so alive. Yeah. And just the way he gets into that story, it's like being told. I mean, I've seen all the old Vincent Price staged film stuff that they have him telling these stories, and it's so different when Jeff gets animated.
It's funny, last year I was, again, talking to my daughter's class, and they had just read The Telltale Heart, and one of the questions they asked was, was Poe a serial killer? Which I thought was a fantastic question.
That is.
And I guess the answer is maybe. In that last week, maybe the answer.
Well, because he writes about it, so it sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and it's so internalized and it's so believable,
right?
That at least if he wasn't, he certainly understood.
I'd put money on it that if he hadn't found writing, he found his channel. Thank God. What do you? I'm always curious because so the idea to turn it into a film, which is, that's a whole conversation we want to have here.
Yeah,
but how do you keep the essence of something that, the live essence of something and turn it cinematic?
Yeah,
because they're so different, those two.
Yeah, is it still just going to be the one actor?
No, it's not. We are going to open it up, and so when we do the Telltale Heart, we'll actually show it as if it as a movie.
Nice.
It's a movie.
So you'll see him, killing the old man and burying him under the floorboards.
Will Jeff be the characters in those sides? Oh,
Yes,
that's great.
And he'll do the Raven with a real Raven,
Okay, cool.
And Annabelle Lee and so forth. But we'll also, have him doing the recital in this theater in which his fiancée is sitting there, Sarah Whitman, and and he keeps drinking a little too heavily and
keeps calling her out even though she doesn't want to be called out.
And he's promised her that he would stop drinking.
Yeah.
That's what sort of the thing that's the unspoken part of the story, until she finally walks off and leaves him, and their engagement is over.
And he gets drunker at that point and sadder. One of the things that I was struck by with the show is how it feels like a whole, not necessarily a whole life distilled, but all the ups and downs of a life, especially Poe's life, in 1 hour and a half. In one speech, he's giving this one lecture, because the emotions I felt, you're laughing. By the end, you're like really near tears watching this man's life destroyed. It's really an incredible ride.
Well, I've had audiences say they felt like they wanted to do an intervention.
Right.
Yeah.
That could be the sequel, Celebrity Intervention.
Because you're watching this guy just literally, drinking himself into, sort of madness. And you want him to stop, and you like him, and you kind of say, don't have another drink. You're already too drunk.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that's what kind of gives the show its edge and its suspense.
And I think that's going to be the key. As a director, right? That will be the thing when you translate this to film, trying to still touch people because it's still an emotional story, right?
Yeah. Well, I always with my films, coming from the theater, I try to make them as involving for an audience as possible. To really put, I think audiences want to be put to work.
Yeah.
And I think so many of the movies that we see now are very passive experiences.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So having something where the audience can kind of get involved, that's what I'm all about.
I particularly found that in the last, was it your last one or second to last? Edmond was a film that I really responded. I was really surprised by that film. Wasn't familiar with Mamet's play.
Oh, good.
And I remember just like it was a descent into hell that I wasn't prepared for. Honestly, it might have been the best depiction of hell on earth, as they say, and yet funny. By the end, it's actually pretty damn. William H.
I think it's very funny,
especially by the end, the last sequence. If anyone hasn't seen that, I'd highly recommend Edmond.
Yeah.
I think not enough people probably saw that film.
No, it's so funny. When I was pitching it to the studios, I would always say it was funny.
Black comedy.
And they go, "What's funny about that?" And I said, "Well, they said, can you give us an example of something that's funny in Edmond?" And I said, "Well, I think it's funny that when they ask him why he murdered this person, he said, I think I just had too much coffee."
That's great. So you have to keep the emotional story. So when he's on stage, will it feel like it won't feel, you're not shooting it like he's on a theater by himself with a real audience. It's going to feel like an actual film. Like he's going to feel like he's in.
The audience will be in
costume.
Costume.
Okay.
The stage lighting is going to be gaslight. It's going to be set in 1848. There'll be a stage manager in the wings tearing his hair out. This Poe is going completely bonkers.
In other words, it won't be cheap. It'll still cost money.
It will, yeah. And Sarah Helen Whitman will be sitting in the audience, looking very uncomfortable and trying to get him to stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
So whose idea was it to create, how to get this? I talked to Jeff a long time ago, and he was talking about, let's try to find a way to shoot this live. And it was very problematic from what I remember. Because
didn't you guys film a lot of, I remember going a few times and seeing cameras, and I just assumed it was just for you guys to kind of.
We did shoot a record of the show. And again, shooting theater is very difficult.
Yeah.
Because it's never as good as being there and feeling like you're experiencing it personally. But we did that as so just to capture it, and I think our sense was that we need to do more than that if we're going to make a movie of Nevermore. It's really got to capture the period as well.
And whose idea was it to come up with right now the idea is Kickstarter, right? So obviously films aren't as easy. Well, they've never been easy to get money for a movie, right? But
I think they've gotten a little harder.
It does seem like they've gotten a lot harder.
They're really hard. I mean, I read an article recently about what a hard time Spielberg had making Lincoln.
Yeah.
And this is Steven Spielberg,
right.
And they ended up giving him what for him is a tiny budget, $50 million. He was almost going to do it on HBO, is what I had heard.
Yeah,
Yep.
I read that too.
And it's you'd think that that would be it's the easiest thing in the world to get money to do, and it wasn't. It's the studios, unless it's something that is based on a best-selling novel, or it's another movie or a television show, something that gives them the sense that this is a sure thing.
Can't you just say it's a spin-off of The Following? we're doing a spin-off episode. Give us the budget of one episode and we can make a movie.
Well, that's the thing that happens when you're working on something about Poe. You start realizing that Poe is everywhere.
Yeah.
Every other day I'm doing a crossword puzzle, there's Poe in the crossword puzzle.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that not being something that the studios see as marketable.
I know. I mean, they did do that movie with John Cusack, the Raven.
Yeah, but they made it an action film, and Poe kind of kicked ass in it, and that's not Poe.
No, it had very little to do with the real Poe.
Yeah.
But
wasn't Stallone for the longest time working on?
Yeah, he was.
And that was about that period, right, where he disappeared and the lighthouse at the end of the world or something like that.
And Michael Jackson wanted
I remember that.
To play Poe.
Wanted to play Poe for Stallone. There's a movie that should have been made in the pantheon.
I know.
But it does show the imagination that he captures on basically any filmmaker in this genre. There's something in those stories that always catches your attention and you kind of never leaves, right?
Well, there have been so many great movies. I mean, it was Roger Corman's movies that got me interested in Poe way back when.
Well, we were going to turn the discussion to favorite Poe films, so I want to know which are the ones, which of them also would influence any of the style of the sequences you'll shoot with the stories. Mine's the no-brainer because I've said it here before, but Mask of the Red Death I think's one of the finest films, period, especially visually, I've ever seen. I also think it's Vincent Price is like one of his finest kind of characters.
I would choose The Pit and the Pendulum, I think, as my favorite Corman movie.
Wow.
You liked it so much you made it.
I made it.
Yours is scary though. Lance Henriksen is terrifying in that film. Like I find him it's hard. He's almost too much for me.
He was almost too much for me.
Yeah.
He's a method actor.
Yeah.
He really became Torquemada on the set.
I remember seeing that film quite young and I almost couldn't take it because it just felt so intense.
Yeah.
That character.
Yeah.
Well, again, it was inspired by a trip to the Tower of London. Brian Usna and I were in London for a film festival there, and we went as tourists to the tower, and seeing the way that these people were kept in these tiny little cells and the torture devices and so forth. It was like, boy, the things that people really do are so much worse than anything you can dream up. And then it struck me that you could do The Pit and the Pendulum, because it is set during the Spanish Inquisition, and it would be a great way to kind of redo it. Corman, his adaptation was fantastic, but we took a little different approach with ours.
Oh, and you see the connection between that story and things like Saw, and it's just like it all just direct links,
Well, that was my dissertation. I talked about that last week, how my dissertation, a large chunk of it was focused on Edgar Allan Poe, his torture stories that he wrote being channeled through Vincent Price, and those being the original torture films, was us torturing Vincent Price through bright lights and smells and things like that.
Yeah.
So.
That's good.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope you got a good grade on that.
Not yet. It's still in the works.
Which is your favorite of the Price roles? Because I always think the Usher role is pretty amazing. It's the least pricey. There's something about his hair color. And
I don't know. See, I think
creepy.
that's the most pricey.
I don't think
that's the one where he's like, everything affects him. He's so sensitive to everything.
But he has no mustache and no dark hair.
Everything
so
is about him wilting because of the sensitivity to everything.
The Tingler's the most pricey.
There's a great story about the making the Fall of the House of Usher. That was the first Corman Poe movie. And, Corman really wanted to do it, but I think his partner, Samuel Z. Arkoff, kept saying, well, where's the monster in this movie? There's no monster in this. And he said, the house is the monster.
Well, that's what Poe would have intended because it's a Gothic horror story, so the house always has to be the equal with the character, correct?
So what happened was when they were doing the film, they actually have a scene in it, or a line in it where Vincent Price has to go, the house is the monster.
That's great salesmanship.
And he didn't want to do it. He said, this is the worst line I've ever... I can't say this. This is terrible. And he said, no, you have to say it. Or else we won't get the financing to make this.
Oh, that's awesome.
All right, then I'll say it.
I always liked Tomb of Lygia. That was always one of my faves. So.
That's an interesting one, yeah.
Well, there were some other ones. Ray Milland did Premature Burial, and I always thought that was a pretty great movie.
Yeah. That was the first non-price one, right?
Yeah.
I have a list of Poe films that I want brought to screen. So, but Rob, you haven't talked about your fave yet.
As I was saying before, I'm not as well versed as you guys in Poe films. I mean, believe it or not, I'm not just saying this because Stuart's here, but I have fond memories of the Pit the Pendulum, your version, because that's the one. Elric and I are about the same age, so we probably saw it young, and I just remember being terrified of. Yeah, Lance was just,
Oh, yeah.
Also, I think compared to some of your other films, I think you always have such a playful sensibility in your horror, so they're always fun. You have a good time watching it. That film, to me, was the first one where it was like, no, it's like stripped bare, and you're not going to enjoy this, but you have to watch it, And that it was a lot more intense, I think. So probably why I didn't have the same reaction.
Although it was, we did a lot of research on that one, and finding out about, one of them was sort of a day in the life of a torturer.
Behind the scenes,
it was a schedule. It had this schedule, and it was like there was something about it that was like 9 o'clock. Have coffee. 10 o'clock. Hang the old lady on the wall.
Wow, that would be great.
11 o'clock lunch break. It was like, and so we got into the idea that these people that are the torturers, that this is what they do every day. And it's just a job for them, and so that became sort of horrifying and weirdly funny.
Right? Yeah, the routine of it. That's pretty. Yeah, I mean, there's been some interesting ones. A lot of the older stuff, the kind of more visual, like the Gene Epstein, I think 28, House of the Usher, The Fringe.
Oh, that one's totally trippy.
It's beautiful. I mean, I don't know if it gets the essence. And there's another one. I did the Spirits of the Dead thing by Fellini that has some interesting visuals.
Fellini's section is fabulous.
Yeah, there's a couple of them that. Which one had Fonda in it? Is it the Roger Vadim?
Yeah, Roger Vadim.
A couple of them didn't kind of lost in translation for me. But
but the Fellini one is that's such a trip. Toby Dammit.
So I also have to give a throw out to Jim Wynorski, who you would never think of doing Poe, but he did Haunting of Morella, which is now a really hard one to find. And I swear, if you cut out all the TNA and like big hair and
send it to us.
Half naked witches, it's actually a really good Poe adaptation.
Really?
Yeah, I swear it's not bad considering it's Wynorski. The set design,
Elric doesn't believe you.
The costume design, I have it. It's rather
Was
rare.
it him or one of his 5 aliases, which I found out he uses because he made so many movies every year. It wasn't because he was ashamed of them. It was because he would have to make 5 films a year, and the sales manager would go, "You can't release 5. We can't sell 5 movies." So he created aliases so he could sell all his movies.
That's a good problem.
Yeah, I thought that. Yeah, exactly right.
No, and this was the one. It was scandalous because it had Nicole Eggert from Charles in Charge. She was in
Nicole
one of
Eggert from Baywatch in an Edgar Allan Poe film. I don't know.
Yeah, and she's half naked in it, but they use body double for her because she didn't want to get naked. But everybody thinks she's naked. But it's also got Lana Turner, who was the one that Phil Spector killed, and it's like scandal surrounds this film. And it's got a lot of witches and body TNA lesbian makeout scenes. But if you cut all that out, it's actually a really good Poe adaptation. Actually, I'm pretty sure Poe probably would have liked all the body TNA lesbian makeout witch scenes. They probably would have enjoyed it. So, but yeah, it's not a bad film.
Did you ever see Two Evil Eyes?
Yes.
Yeah. What did you think of that in terms of adaptation? Not so much as a film, but did you think they were kind of interesting?
Well, it was interesting because when I was going to do The Black Cat for Masters of Horror, they were concerned because Dario Argento was one of the masters, and that they were afraid that this would offend him, that I was going to redo.
Even though there's nothing connecting those two visions.
That's what I said. I said, I don't think this is going to...
No. His was very contemporary. I mean...
there's nothing... The two are so different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I rewatched it not long ago. I thought it was interesting as a film. I don't know if it was as interesting as Poe adaptations. I thought that, there's moments with the cat and Harvey Keitel that work, but it just, again, maybe like you said, it doesn't necessarily go all the way.
Yeah, they couldn't bring themselves to hurt the cat, which is really what the story is about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems, and I mean, because so much of your work was Lovecraft inspired. When you were younger, did one of them have more of a pull, or were you interested in both writers?
Well, I got to Lovecraft later. Poe sort of led me to Lovecraft. But the two writers are so different. The Lovecraft never has women characters in his stories, and Poe is all about women.
Right.
He's a romantic.
Right, and if you look at their lives, they couldn't be more different, right? Like Poe, you kind of fall in love with the idea of this romantic, and then you start reading too much about Lovecraft, and you might get turned off because he might have sympathies you don't agree with, But
although Lovecraft did find love, late in life, he was married, and there's a lot of stories about his wife, sort of introducing him to sex.
Interesting. Would he make an interesting? I mean, because I know he's a lot more sedate a character. Would he make an interesting biography film, or would it just be too internal?
No, I think he'd be he's a fascinating guy.
His New York years when he had his freak out, I think would be really fascinating to look at.
Well, that whole story about him getting married, he was anti-Semitic and he ended up marrying a Jewish woman.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And she brought him to New York City, took him away from Providence, Rhode Island, where he'd spent his whole life, and opened him up to all sorts of things.
But that's when he wrote my 3 favorite stories. He wrote Murder in Red Hook, the music of Eric Zahn, and Cool Air. And those are 3 of my favorite of his. And they were all written under the duress and stress of living in Red Hook.
I think he also, I want to say he wrote Re-Animator during that time as well, as a serial. And one of the weirdest Lovecraft stories he wrote then was Ghost wrote it for Harry Houdini, called Imprisoned with the Pharaohs, where it's about, it's all written in the first person as if Houdini is telling the story.
Was it you or Dennis who discovered the Herbert West story, of Re-Animator?
It was actually a girlfriend of my brother-in-law who you mentioned it to me, and I had never heard of it. And it was because the story was out of print for years and years. Lovecraft didn't like Herbert West Re-Animator. I found out later the reason he didn't like it was that he'd been paid to write it.
It wasn't pure.
Yeah. He was into this thing about being an amateur writer, and that amateur means doing something you love to do. And if you're being paid to do it, then it doesn't count.
Interesting. And now for you went directly from theater to that, or was there something in between? How did you make that leap to be... it's interesting now that kind of you're going full circle by returning to theater.
Yeah, I started doing theater and actually did a play called Poe back in the early 70s. That was about his disappearance.
Oh, cool.
It sort of focused on that and sort of went into Poe's mind, and, it was a sort of kind of phantasmagorical collage of his life and his stories.
And that'll be an extra feature on the DVD for anyone interested. That will be an extra $100,000 to shoot, but still.
Yeah, that would be an expensive movie.
Yeah, I'd say so. But I mean, we were discussing before, obviously both of them have cinematic qualities or things that light your imagination, but we were discussing which one.
We were arguing about this.
Well, I don't even know if I have a good argument. I just, from the films I've seen of Lovecraft, I feel but they're also yours. So this isn't a great argument. But the ones I've seen, for me, they're more cinematic than a lot of the Poe adaptations, which always feel a little more dated to me, even though the ideas are amazing.
See,
and you think the opposite way.
I disagree completely. I think that Lovecraft does not lend himself to cinema because he's so vague with his descriptions. Everything's like a shapeless form.
But to me, vague is exactly what a filmmaker wants.
Unexplainable music.
No, vague is great because you use your imagination.
It's descriptive. So.
Well, I think
you have imagination, right?
A little bit.
All right, so use that.
How much is left?
Use that.
When I read Poe, I picture what's going on. When I read Lovecraft, it's always unexplainable, and he describes it as unexplainable.
Well,
right.
Some of his stories are like that, but there are other stories of his that are very, explicit and clear. And I think those are the ones that make the best movies. There's a lot of, you have to sort of look for the sort of action-packed stories.
What was the story behind I don't know anything about the backstory of From Beyond in terms of the story it's based on. What was that about? How obviously it can't be that similar because From Beyond's so modern.
From Beyond was one of Lovecraft's earliest stories,
right?
And it was only 7 pages long.
I imagined it was slight.
And so we used up his story in the pre-credit sequence of the film, and so everything that came after that had to be kind of invented.
So it was about dimensionality.
Well, it was about a scientist. The story's about a scientist who develops this machine that stimulates the pineal gland.
So that was part of his.
Yeah, that's in the story, and that he brings his friend to show it to him, and the friend had thought he was crazy, and he said, "See, it really is true." And what he wanted was for the creatures from the beyond to eat his friend, kill his friend. That's sort of what he.
Oh, interesting.
What the setup is, but he ends up getting killed by them himself. Now I've ruined the story. I should have said spoiler alert.
Has there been renewed interest? Because I always think that film. I mean, I grew up in New Zealand. I saw that film. That film again was kind of like Society. They were like not films that were hard to find where I grew up. They were like as mainstream as Re-Animator. They were on the same shelf. Whereas here, I've noticed films like that went a little under the radar.
From Beyond was a little bit more under the radar, but all of Re-Animator was huge.
Right. No, of course, yeah. But I mean, now that Scream Factory, there were our guests last week. Gorgeous transfer. It's
a beautiful film.
Do you find that people are more aware of it?
I think over the years it's become, its popularity has increased, and I'm really happy I was able to restore it because the MPA really savaged that film.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And was able to put back everything that they cut out for the high def version.
How much was cut out from there? I didn't know that.
I would say about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And it was sort of the key 5 minutes.
The sexual stuff, or is it more gore stuff?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, they sort of really defanged it, is what they did.
Yeah, I think a big part of the appeal of that is because I remember it vaguely as a kid, but then for many years it was really hard to get, especially like when DVDs first started coming out, and it was like and I remember this has to be at least 10 years ago when me and a friend met Ken Foray at a convention and asked him about it, and he was like, "Man, when can we see the uncut version of From Beyond?" He's like, "Man, I'll have one foot in the grave before that ever happens." And it's like, well, thankfully, it was a lot sooner than that. But
I'd been told, I'd been looking, because people were asking me about that for years, and I was looking for the footage and couldn't find it, and had been told that it had been destroyed, and then got a call. The movie ended up being sold from one company to another, and ended up at MGM. And the people at MGM called me up, and they said, "You should come down here. We found something. We don't know what it is." And it was sort of like being called to the morgue to identify a relative. And there was this little film can, and inside of it were all the trims that the editor had been made to cut by the MPAA. And we were able to put them back into the movie, which was using all sort of digital, magic.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. Yeah. And actually, was it true that you didn't intend that to be the next movie at that point? You were trying to make Dagon for a long time.
Yeah, Dagon was supposed to be the film to follow Re-Animator.
Wow.
But
and that took what? That must be 20 years later, right?
Well, it's like 15 years. Yeah, 15 years.
I talk about that one on the show all the time. Yeah, it's one of my favorite films. And actually, I used to teach at Hunter College before I moved to Los Angeles. And I taught horror film history, and I did one of my units on adaptations, and I had my kids read Shadow over Innsmouth and Dagon, and then we would watch the Dagon movie. And I'd done it for a couple of years, and one day I'm sitting in my office, and there's this knock at my door, and this man is standing there, and he goes, one of your students gave me your syllabus, and I was wondering if you want me to talk when you showed Dagon. And I was like, "And you are?" And he goes, "Oh, I work in the writing center. I'm Dennis Paoli." And I was like, "Holy crap, you work at Hunter?" And so, from then on, he talked to my class for the rest of the time I was in Hunter, every single time I showed it.
That's wonderful.
That is really fun. I also want to ask about the reverse adaptations. So adapting Re-Animator from a film that you hadn't directed since the original, there's a franchise, obviously, afterwards, returning to that. I mean, A, what sparked the interest? And you had the old team back, which is the amazing part and probably why it works. But how did A, that even come up as an idea, and B, what was that process like? How do we make this into theater?
Into a musical.
Yeah, and fun, and something that people will... Because, her in turn for Fangoria must have gone like 50 times or something.
My intern Amanda Story.
She might have seen it every time.
I think she was there every night.
It was
she knew
amazing.
The cast by first name basis afterwards.
Did she work on it, or she just wanted
No,
to?
she went
just
as
a fan, and she was there every night. And for my birthday last year, she took me. So I was like, fine, my intern's taking me out for my birthday, and she got us tickets and everything. And she was there every single night.
Yeah, no. So I mean, it had that same. It did have that cult appeal. I mean, it had that thing that gets on your skin. You want to keep singing and being part of.
Yeah.
But what made you think it could have that?
People were suggesting it should be a musical for years, and I kept laughing. I thought that was the silliest idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't see that.
You know, and then one day it just sort of struck me, why not? You know, you really could use. You know, the effects were all stage effects, practical effects. Why not do them live on stage?
And that is part of the real fun of it, because the first time you see it, you're genuinely kind of surprised when stuff starts flying.
Yeah.
And Graham Skipper does an excellent job covering the audience in the final intestine.
Yes, indeed, he does.
Well, I got to say, actually, the first time I saw that, I had a really special experience because I actually saw you guys do a live reading of it months before you actually put the show together. I can't remember. I think it was either Jackson Stewart or maybe it was Zane Grant, one of those guys that I went with to see this reading. And the reason it was special is because it was literally them on stage just reading it. There's no gore effects, no nothing yet. They're just kind of working through it. And I think the cast was primarily the same. I think one person, I think there's a different Dr. Hill,
yes,
perhaps.
That's right.
But again, because you hear Re-Animator the musical, you have no idea what you're expecting. So I walked in there and I have no idea how they're going to make this into a musical. And then seeing you guys perform it, like everybody with their scripts in hands, was just amazing. And even Stuart on stage, I remember you in the background, you were the cat.
I did sound effects.
Yeah.
Nice.
So just watching Stuart on stage, you're like, meow, meow, just in the background. It was like kind of hysterical and very magical. But I thought that was amazing. And also, the interesting thing is how characters in movies that you associate with actors kind of take on a life of their own. Meaning, I can't not think of Jeffrey Combs when I think of Herbert West, in the same way I can't not think of Bruce Campbell with Ash.
Right.
But in the same way, when I saw Evil Dead the musical in New York, as soon as that actor, that one was Ryan Ward, as soon as he got on and performed it, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, it's not Bruce Campbell anymore. That's an actual character that they created. It has a life of its own. And seeing Graham, play Herbert West and be able to sing amazingly, you're just like, oh my God, like it's not just Jeffrey Combs. I mean, he created it, but now other people will probably end up playing it for God knows how long. Like it'll be one of those characters, which is kind of an amazing thing.
Well, it's one of those things now when I watch the movie, I keep waiting for them to start singing.
Now that's another question. Obviously, the extension is, could that be filmed like a movie, but as a musical? Could Re-Animator be reimagined, I guess, as a musical?
Sure. I mean,
it'd be interesting. I mean, Jesse Merlin is the thing about it that, like, I walked out just like mind blown about how funny. I mean, he was funny. Like, he could have been on Saturday Night Live funny, in my opinion, in that role. Like, it just really kind of shocked. And some of your gags, some of your like live shifts, the first head shift off you're just like, wow. Like, it's like magic.
Jesse's brilliant.
Yeah, it's good. But could you imagine that? Do you think that's something?
I think, I think it could be done. But my feeling is it's so much fun to see it done live.
Yeah, that could be.
That's people are all about 3D and these trying to make the experience more involving in theater. It doesn't have to worry about that stuff. It's really happening right in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Hey, did you take Re-Animator the musical out of town the way that you did Nevermore?
Yeah, our New York staff raved about it, so it must have made it to New York.
Yeah, we took it to the New York Musical Theater Festival summer before last, and it was a huge success there. We really had fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then we took it to the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland, and we did it there for a month. That was great, too.
Oh, that's excellent.
Have you guys done a soundtrack of the actual music?
We haven't done that
songs?
yet. I would like to.
That'd be fun.
I wish we had.
My intern will buy it.
Yeah, I think that would have sold a lot if you did it again.
Yeah.
Is there a thought to get that same group back, more or less, and do another?
Yeah, I mean, I think our plan is to bring it back to New York. The reception there was so terrific.
What's the difference between LA and New York when it comes to that kind of stuff? Is the live experience? LA just can't really. It's not used. We're used to movies here. Is that the problem?
No. There's a really great theater audience in LA, and we ran the show for 6 months here.
Yeah,
I mean, it was, audiences were terrific. So it's just sort of with theater, all roads lead to New York.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I bet Japan, it would be huge.
But, the few times I saw it in LA, it's like one time I went and like Joe Dante was 2 seats over, and another time Angus Scrimm. You're not going to get that in New York.
Yeah.
No, so. we had some wonderful audiences.
I went
people showing up, wearing white lab coats so they could get blood all over them. And
it's like a Guar concert. Yeah. I like that.
I went to the first, I think it was the opening one, and beforehand we're in a diner across the street, and I said to someone, I wonder where Brian Yesna is, because he hasn't been in America for so long at the time. And I said to someone, I wonder where I haven't heard of him or seen him for like 10 years or something. Somebody, he's making films in, I don't know, Spain. Is it some country? And then I get in line for my ticket, and he was the person standing in front of me. and I told him, I said, I was just it was like I had summoned him onto the plane. But it was, how did people like Barbara Crampton and Jeff react when they first saw it? Barbara, was it shocking?
Well, I think Jeffrey was pretty shocked.
Right.
Shocked in a good way, I hope.
Well, yeah, good and bad. I think, was the idea of seeing somebody else playing that part, I think, was kind of a little unnerving for him.
Yeah.
But, he liked it. Barbara came back, 3 or 4 times to see it.
That's great.
Several times.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, because the girl, the actress isn't playing that close to like Barbara. Mm-hmm. And same with, I thought Jesse Merlin's kind of taking it on his own to play the doctor. But really, the Jeffrey Combs character is really Jeffrey Combs. You know what I mean? You're playing that type. And so I could imagine that being a little unnerving. Mm-hmm. But it's still fun.
Yeah.
So when we cut, I was talking with everyone off camera. Off mic,
audio,
about Poe Day, because I grew up in Virginia. And because of Poe's proximity to Virginia, he grew up in Richmond, went to the University of Virginia and everything, and then transmigrated up to Baltimore. We had Poe kind of shoved down our throats the entire way through. And actually, the region I live in is what he called the Ragged Mountains, which is, if you're in Richmond, you go west and then slightly south. And it's the Appalachian Mountains, for lack of a better way of describing it. But we had Poe Day in a lot of the different grades, definitely in all of the English classes I ever did, where we would read Poe and talk about Poe and do Poe arts and crafts and things like that. So when you guys say you're not familiar with Poe, it shocks the hell out of me.
I'm familiar. I'm much more familiar with Poe than I am Lovecraft, like where I grew up, but not in the way that you grew up with him. Because in New Zealand, we have a day for the Queen's birthday. It's embarrassing. So it's nowhere near as cool as Poe Day.
We have Poe Day. So,
but yeah, But Lovecraft, definitely not. I mean, Lovecraft, would probably not even be whispered growing up. I probably didn't even hear about it till I saw Re-Animator, to be honest, or something like that, or got into horror.
Same here.
I definitely didn't hear of Lovecraft until it was actually in high school. I used to listen to some Swedish metal band. I can't even remember their name, but they had a song about Cthulhu. And I looked up Cthulhu, and thus I was introduced to Lovecraft.
I saw a book once, and I didn't read it, but it really struck my imagination for a film, which was, I don't know if you're familiar with it, where Lovecraft and Poe on a stormy day get stuck in the same hotel, and they start exchanging stories, and they spend the night together. And I don't know what else happened. I saw it on the shelf one, and I should have bought it years ago. It looked really interesting. I should look it up and pass on. But it was just how close?
They're 100 years apart.
Yeah. I'm sure it's like a mythology. Yeah.
Lovecraft reported reading quite a bit of Poe, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he was very influenced by Poe, and as a matter of fact, tried to copy his style initially. No, Poe, is the most popular American writer. He really is.
If you go to...
in tattoos.
In tattoos.
Well, period. Who else, what other writer has got an NFL football team named after one of his characters?
The Ravens.
It's like, Poe is everywhere.
We have multiple pubs in Richmond, Virginia, named after him. There's the Ravens pub, and then there's all these different pubs. But and there's also Poe Convention in Virginia that we have, which is like a literary convention just for Poe. But my favorite thing is in Charlottesville at University of Virginia, where he went to college. Mm-hmm. He was there only for a few months because they kicked him out for, supposedly, I always heard gambling, but he lost money and things like that. But he lived in these dorms that are, it's not like a building. It's like this row housing, and it faces right out to the campus. And now you have to be an Eccles Scholar. Like, you have to be one of the top students to live in these dorms. But they have his old room encased in glass. And if you look inside, there's a raven, like an old moth-eaten bird, because nobody can go in there, sitting on the fireplace. And then they've got like an old raggedy coat up, and they've got century, like 18th century furniture, the original furniture and everything. And you push this button and it like tells you the story of Poe at University of Virginia and this horrible impression of him. So, but yeah, it's still there to this day. Even though the university kicked him out, they glorify him now.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, that was why he had to leave home too, because he had, the amount of money that he lost. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was something fairly huge amount of money, even by today's standards. And back then, it would be like $500,000 or something.
Wow!
Oh my God!
Gambling.
Did he ever write like more diaristic stuff? So like more like of actually, I know his letters obviously are.
Well, he wrote a lot of essays about things. He wrote an essay about how to write a short story, which is one of his best things. But he also wrote scientific articles, and some people say that he's the one that came up with the idea of the idea that stars are light years away from us, and that we're seeing them. They're actually millions of years old. That we're looking at these old images of these stars.
I always liked his hoax stuff because he did a couple of articles where he wrote as if he was. It was kind of like War of the Words with Orson Welles, where he would write as if he was a doctor and he had just used galvanization, which is electrocution, to bring somebody back to life. And then it would be published in these journals, but it would be written like a factual, like delivery of what's going on. But it was a total hoax.
He also wrote the first detective stories, and they were, and actually, Conan Doyle admitted that he basically ripped off Poe to create Sherlock Holmes.
Wow.
That the characters that he wrote, were exactly like Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And Poe actually did solve a murder himself. Using the techniques of.
That's what I'd hoped The Raven would be. I remember hearing that story. I think it might have been from Jeffrey, and I remember it lit my imagination. Oh wow, you can make a detective series set in that period.
Well, it was funny. I ran into the people who were making The Raven, and it was kind of odd. I mentioned something about Poe writing the detective story, and they didn't realize that.
Oh wow!
And it was like. They have him teaming up with a detective, and it's like
he was the
detective.
Yeah,
one less character they needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Do you have a personal favorite Poe story? Because it seems like at bookstores they always have these great like complete works of Poe like editions and stuff. So if somebody would go out and buy it and start reading Poe stuff, which story is your favorite? What do you think they should start with?
Well, there's a story I keep thinking about a lot lately, it's called The Case of M. Valdemar, which is a very creepy story about a guy, an old man who's dying, and he gets this idea that if he is hypnotized at the point of death, that maybe they can keep him alive. And it's written from the point of view of the hypnotist, who's brought in to do this, and he goes through with it, and they hypnotize the guy, and he ends up being sort of locked in this kind of trance, and his body. It's such a creepy thing. The body is moaning and crying, but the lips aren't moving. They just it's just lying there, and he's seeing. He says, "Where are you?" And he says, "I'm in darkness. Let me die." He's like pleading with them, and this goes on for months, and finally, the guy breaks the spell, and the last line of it is, this is one of those lines that you just always remember, that he ends up turning into liquid putrescence.
So yeah, we're going to turn our attention just quickly to because the Kickstarter, I don't think it's just to plug Kickstarters, but I think given that you are a director who's made like a lot of the people listening and a lot of people in this room's favorite genre films, it might surprise some people that you have to use Kickstarter. So I think what it's showing is what Becca was saying, which is this is a shift into a totally different space. And just like I've been running a small business, same kind of thing. If somebody likes something, they should support it. Or if they want to support it, they'll keep it going. If you don't want to support that, you can't expect it to keep going. If you don't want to pay for an indie film by a director you love, then maybe it'll never happen, And so I think, in a way, this could be a good thing. It's like we get to own what we want most.
I'm always dicey about Kickstarter, though. I mean, it works.
The model's cutthroat because if you don't get it, and that's a little scary.
It's so saturated right now with so many indie films that it's impossible to discern out what's good and bad. And then when I see something like this is where I'm going to put my money, just because it's guaranteed actors and
Well, and there's like if it's a new indie film that you haven't heard of anyone involved, it's a risk, and maybe it's a good film, maybe it's not. But you've now seen a great stage show, you've seen someone's film work, so you can trust the team in place.
This has a track record. I'm going with this one.
But it still must be like a kind of a scary way to go for you.
Well, it's new,
uncharted.
It's completely new for me, and in a way, I think it's good. I'm one of these guys who's sort of a Luddite, when it comes to new technology, and this sort of forced me into that world.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying it, I have to say. I started to, tweet.
Yeah, and Jeff did too, right?
Yeah,
people, Jeffrey's
and which was I was like dreading it, and it turned out to be really fun. I'm enjoying it.
Well, it's like real interaction with people who care about your work and are interested.
Yeah, and also in just getting, following other people, who you admire or you want to see what they're.
It's a lot of ideas floating around. It's easy to find them,
Yeah, it's cool, and the coming up with the incentives for this was easy because there's so much, as we were saying, about Poe. We even got the Baltimore Ravens to give us a autographed football.
Yeah,
as one of our incentives.
I am looking at your incentives on my phone right now.
And we went
technology.
We did go to the museum, the Poe Museum in Richmond, as a matter of fact.
The house that you can walk through.
And they gave us a lot of things, including a book called Poe in Richmond, I believe.
Because you guys performed there, right? Didn't you? Or you performed near?
We actually went to Baltimore, performed at Poe's gravesite.
That's right, yeah, I remember.
But I would love to go to Richmond. That would be one of the.
I'll put you in touch.
Yeah.
You need some theaters there.
I would love it, yeah.
So, I guess if you get something like a football, the key is then to make sure like the NFL or somebody tweets it who reaches a whole different audience, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's, you realize that, Poe, and that's the thing about him, both him and Lovecraft, during their lives, they both died in abject poverty.
Yeah.
Very young. Poe had 5 people at his funeral when he died.
Wow.
And now, they're like gigantic. He's the most popular writer in America. And the same thing's happening with Lovecraft. There's all these games and movies and, merchandising. I mean, if Lovecraft were alive, he'd be a billionaire today.
Yeah.
So, there's something about both of these men who have captured all of our imaginations, and we feel like we know them, we love them.
Right.
Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen the video yet that him and Jeffrey put together for the Kickstarter, check that out. It's pretty fun. There's one point where you bring out the bronze statue of Poe, and Jeffrey's like, no, wait, that's mine. I want it. You're like, no. Got to give it up. He's like, you want it, you're going to donate.
Yeah, I just saw that. I want that.
It's pretty fun.
Well, and I guess when you're choosing between this and Indiegogo, I mean, I think this is relevant to like independent filmmakers listening to this. It's like, I remember you lose a certain percentage, obviously, of the money. And when you're going for hundreds of thousands, or as some actors have been going for a couple million, that's a lot of money. Yeah. So if you lose a few percentage, suddenly you lost $100,000 or whatever it is. I know Indiegogo was maybe a little less percentage.
But Indiegogo's kind of got a funky setup that makes it a little bit more risky, because if a film is asking for $50,000 and you donate $50, they get that $50
no
whether they
what.
Actually make that film or not.
Yeah.
Right.
With Kickstarter, you have to reach the goal in order to get the money, which is a little bit reassuring to somebody
for the
like
investor,
me
it's better.
Investing,
But for the filmmaker, it's probably a little scarier because
Was there a debate between Kickstarter and Indiegogo, or did you do research on that sort of thing?
Yeah, we did. We talked about both of them, and we felt that Kickstarter was the way to do it.
Kind of an all or nothing, like, because that's the budget you need, and if we can't get it, we can't make the movie.
I think Indiegogo is something I'd like to explore in the future.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to.
I think it's actually. I think it might be better for if you were trying to get $2,000 or something small. I think it might be a really good site for that.
Yeah, my first film was Indiegogo. Yeah. We were hoping to get 5,000. I think we got 3, and we still made.
Yeah, and
you
can still make the movie.
Yeah.
That's great.
But I think in this situation, when you know what your budget has to be, it's probably all or nothing. I mean, I guess the scary scenario is if you get a huge amount, but don't, like if you're on 300,000 and you need to get that other 75, do you guys have to think about look other investors at the last minute just in case, or
I think
or is it all options?
Yeah, I mean, you get into the sort of scramble mode at the end, I think.
Like KCRW when they do their pledge, and you're listening, it's like Will Ferrell will give 10,000 if somebody doubles.
But there's something about it that's inherently dramatic too.
Right.
We're almost there. We need your help to.
Maybe we need to do a live telethon for the last 24 hours and just stream it. We can do it at Jump Cut.
I love it. Let's do it at Jump Cut.
You'll have a heart attack at the end, though, but but there must be. So before we wrap, what are some of the other cool incentives? I know there's obviously going to be some original posters from your films.
The posters are all gone. As a matter of fact,
good.
We had From Beyond and Re-Animator posters.
I just saw some stuff from some of your other films, like King of the Ants.
Yeah. We just put up some soundtracks from King of the Ants and Re-Animator and From Beyond, which will be signed by the composers as well as myself and Jeffrey.
Here's a quick interjection because you mentioned that. Daniel Roebuck Lefeur, Facebook, says, would you like to explore further the themes or story of King of Ants in the future?
King of the Ants?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because we did talk about the idea of a possible sequel to that movie.
Yeah. Interesting. He must have thought that. This was one we put up before we came out. We asked a few questions, and I think
I got a few.
You've got a few. I want to make sure.
Run through a couple quick ones. But since you mentioned, and I'm glad you mentioned King of the Ants because I actually wanted to do a quick roundtable with you guys. Your favorite scene or most memorable moment from one of Stuart's films? Because the one I'm going to throw out.
Can I just say something?
Go ahead.
Get a job in a site. Done.
Well, actually, you know what I love is that Waxworks record that just came out of the soundtrack.
Yeah.
I love that side A is Cat Dead and side B is Details Later. When I pulled that record out, I thought it was amazing.
That's really cool.
But no, what I wanted to say was, obviously, I love Re-Animator, I love From Beyond, I love those like kind of out of control like horror type of movies. But I own King of the Ants. I've only watched it once. And the only reason is because I think it's to me one of the most horrific murders ever captured on film. When Ron Livingston gets killed by that lead character, it's so long and drawn out and upsetting that I never want to watch it again because I mean that as a compliment. It's one of the most hardest scenes and things to watch. So that's got to be probably the most memorable moment that I think I've seen in one of Stuart's
films. There's a murder that's also pretty brutal in Edmond, right? I mean, is it the wife that's stabbing the wife? I'm trying to think.
It's not his wife. It's a girl he spent the night with.
Yeah, it's just kind of.
Why are you so good at those types of scenes?
Yeah. Why are you so good at ugly?
Well, it's like Poe is a serial killer.
Yeah,
and I guess we all are inside.
Yeah,
at some point.
All right. Why don't we do a couple of quick questions and then we'll wrap up here. From Facebook, Jeff Dean wants to know, what are some of your favorite genre picks of the last couple of years? Obviously we know some of the classics, but what have you seen recently that you think is kind of strong horror?
Well, the strongest thing I saw in a long time was this movie called A Serbian Film.
Wow. That is strong.
That movie knocked me out. I thought it was extremely well done.
So did I.
And very, very powerful and amazingly well made. And it was funny because I ran into the guys who made it at a film festival.
You got arrested?
Before I saw it.
You're in jail and you visited them in jail?
No. They came up to me and they said, Stuart, your movie inspired us to make this. And
wow.
Which one?
Yeah, wow.
Amazing Ice Cream Soup, probably.
Yeah. Space Truckers.
I think it was From Beyond.
From Beyond is a very kinky movie. I mean,
after I saw their film, then I realized what they were talking about because it's about sexual horror and it's something that you very seldom see anymore.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's actually funny. That's BJ's question. BJ's a friend of the show.
Have you seen when you see America? Like one thing we often talk about here is that maybe the imagination or the fantastic has been missing in horror the last 20 years compared to maybe in the 80s. Maybe that's one of the essences of people like Coscarelli and people whose work had something you could really fall in love with. Have you seen any work like that in the last few years in America or anywhere that is a little bit more maybe magical? Might not be the best way, but fantastical.
Yeah, I mean, there's this Korean movie called The Host that
phenomenal. They're making a sequel right now.
Yeah, good. I met the director in that one also, and he was very upset because I guess that J.J. Abrams was like was like talking to him, and he thought that J.J. Abrams was going to give him some money to make another movie, and then J.J. Abrams went off and did Cloverfield.
Oh, Cloverfield.
Yeah, which is shockingly similar.
Yeah.
But without the humor.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing about The Host you remember is the humor. You remember the conversations and the crying. And
I'll tell you what I liked about The Host
scene.
was that most movies about giant monsters are all about the National Guard and we've got to tell the president.
Right.
And all.
Yeah.
This movie was about a family. And they made it very personal, and I liked that a lot. And I also thought that the monster was just the greatest. It was like you think you've seen it all, and then you see this.
Yeah, he was really cool.
So I'm going to call you out on it while you're here. You didn't mention any American filmmakers in the last two things, Serbian films. So are there any, and if there's a problem with new American films, you can say it. We are on air. I'm just curious, do you think there's something maybe changing in the culture, like genre in America, or is it just, are we kind of mining the well too much? You know, I feel like this has been a great year in horror. I've said a lot this year. This year, over the last few years, I've seen a lot of films that kind of have surprised me, a lot of indie stuff that's impressed me. But
well, I think that there are, there are good movies being made all over the world.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I like now. It used to be that horror was an American film,
right,
and now it's international, and
yeah,
it's always interesting to see different cultures. What scares them really.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of taken with those.
You're still avoiding that.
But I actually would agree with kind of what you're poking there, Elric, because I think that American films now, what we've seen as a trend in the 80s, it was all about us going into the fantastic.
Right.
We're entering the beyond. We're entering all of these fantastic realms. But now, often for budget reasons, it's all about that just trickling slightly into our world.
I will mention one movie, especially since we're talking about Jeffrey Combs, that I really liked a lot. It was called Would You Rather?
Yeah.
And
I think that's I talked about it a few weeks ago, and I think it's his.
We had Danielle.
I think it's my favorite of his performances since The Re-Animator. Honestly, I think it's a really good performance.
He's great in that film.
Yeah,
but the film itself is really great.
Yeah,
too.
It was fun. I was really surprised
and really well acted, and builds a huge head of steam. I mean, in terms of creating suspense and dread. So yeah, I like that movie a lot.
Yeah, it was a real surprise, that one. Because you expect just a kind of straight torture.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be a torture film.
It's a lot more fun than that. It I don't know. There's a quality to it,
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take that. I'll take that one American director.
Well, that's a good one because it's an indie film. It wasn't done by a major studio.
Yeah.
It's definitely a quiet release. I like that.
But yeah, I think it's always worth us trying to figure out what, like we said, are we just doing the films because they fit within our budgetary constraints, which to me is not a great way to go about filming. You want to see the imagination unleashed.
Well, I would ask you guys, what are the films that you would recommend?
Oh God, you'll have to listen to the last 20 episodes of the show. We've listed hundreds. Recently, there's been quite a few.
I talked about in my review of Prometheus that love or hate the film, it was one of the first films where our world traveled to another world and entered into their realm in a long time. And so love or hate the film, you got to love it for at least that, for pushing us into the fantastic instead of just having it leak into our world.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen it. I mean, lately we've been talking about a couple smaller films, The Battery.
Oh, it's amazing.
A film called Resolution that we had on people. And both had, imagination within the budgetary constraints. And I think what we were saying is they knew exactly, if they had the clear vision of what they wanted to be, it didn't matter if they didn't have the budget because they found a way to shoot it in a way that you didn't need to see 100 zombies. You knew they were there. And I think that's smart indie filmmaking, where sometimes it's kind of like they had the 100 zombies, they didn't have a clear vision. And so I don't know. But, this year I've seen a lot of interest. Did you see a film called Citadel by any chance? Irish? It was interesting. I thought that was an interesting one.
Stoker would definitely be one I would recommend just because they had a budget. It was Chan Wook Park, but he used his budget to create amazing visuals, and it's all in the cinematography. Film? Stoker?
The guy who made Old Boy, his new film, the director.
I did see that.
Yeah. It's very gorgeous. I mean, I don't know if it's a straight horror film, but it's a
beautiful
thriller,
film.
Or it's kind of Hitchcockian,
Yeah, very Hitchcockian. It's actually like
Uncle.
Uncle Charlie.
Uncle Charlie, yeah.
What's the name of that movie?
We did this before, and it was the same title
that
got
guys.
us all. It's actually embarrassing. We're gonna have to cut this part out because this happened at the exact point of a show where somebody goes, "Oh yeah, it's Hitchcock," and everyone got on their phones.
Uncle Charlie, and then we were googling it for an hour.
Yeah. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Whatever that is a great movie.
So I want to ask: is there any Poe or Lovecraft stories that you would really someday like to make to film that you have not yet?
Well, Dennis Paoli and I have been trying to get a movie made for 20 years of The Thing on the Doorstep, which is one of our favorite Lovecraft stories.
I want to see this movie.
Yeah, so do we.
Wow.
And there's already a script for that, right? I think, because I know you've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah. It's a great story. It's one of the few Lovecraft stories that's got a strong woman character.
Yeah, he didn't use a lot of women, it was always reported that he was severely xenophobic and multiple phobias of other things too. So.
Yeah.
Shadow of a doubt.
Shadow of a Doubt.
It was Shadow of a Doubt, guys.
Sorry, guys. It would drive me insane.
Yeah. A great movie. Joseph Cotton.
Yeah, Joseph Cotton is.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah,
I think we had a couple.
We had quite a couple, but I'm gonna kind of combine. I'll combine two of them. Dominic asks, why do you enjoy collaborating with Jeffrey Combs so much? And on the same token, Adam Barnick asked, what is your process like with actors directly, especially considering you come from theater and then have done, films as well?
I always like to rehearse, before we shoot, rehearse for at least a week or, longer if we can.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do your rehearsal as all the way as characters, or is it more just discovery? Because some people think of rehearsal. Some people don't like to rehearse with them getting too familiar with the character or doing the character. They try to read it flat. Or
no, I don't. I think you have to. An actor can really develop a character in rehearsal, and people are always worried that rehearsal is going to make them lose their spontaneity. But
yeah, you hear that a lot from people.
Those are people who don't do theater. I think,
right?
Because when you're doing theater, you're doing it 8 times a week,
right?
And it has to be fresh every night. And
did you have that kind of rehearsal for the original Re-Animator?
We did. We did. And all of the thing I like about Jeffrey Combs, to answer that part of your question, is that I love actors who are willing to make fools of themselves.
Yeah.
who are not afraid to try crazy things. And
you mean like George went dressed as a woman on stage, which was hugely impressive.
Yeah. It's like I think actors who are ready to just take chances. Those are, and Jeffrey's one of them. And I never know what he's going to do next. He's always surprising me, which is fantastic.
Let's see. I'll just do like one more. Jeremy on Facebook asks, kind of interesting. If you were given a choice, would you prefer a $20 million budget backed by a major studio, or something smaller like $5 million from an indie studio that you would have final cut?
Well, it's nice having final cut. I'll say that. But it would be nice to have a budget too. And. So I would actually say, give me the $20 million.
You'll deal with whatever they throw at you.
Yeah.
Which of your films was most messed with by other hands?
It was actually From Beyond, which was, and it was the MPAA that really did a number on it. Yes, indeed.
Interesting. And is there a film of yours that you wish more people, one that maybe hasn't been discovered as much, that you kind of would like to know if people... Well,
it's funny. The one that no one can believe that I actually directed is The Wonderful Ice Cream Suit.
Which is an amazing film. My husband and I, we watched that. We were in college, like 1998. Is that when it came out?
Yeah.
And we watched it just because it looked fascinating. And it's such an amazing film.
Yeah, it's really fun. And it's, it's a Ray Bradbury story. And very sweet and gentle and colorful and crazy.
It's almost like a kid's film.
Yeah, it is.
But you were part of another kids. You did the Honey, I Blew Up the Kids, or Shrunk?
Well, I did both. I did both, actually.
As producers, right?
Brian Usen and I created Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and then I was the executive producer of the sequel.
I talk about Society a lot on this air because it just never really came out here properly. But what was the relationship? Obviously, you and Brian had a really fruitful relationship. What was the decision? Was it always known that if Re-Animator hit, that he would go on to direct a sequel, or was that just something that kind of naturally developed? Or?
I think Brian certainly wanted to direct.
Okay, even when you first worked.
Yeah. And I wasn't really crazy about doing a sequel to Re-Animator because I knew that they would not allow it to be released unrated, which the original film had been. Oh, so that sort of ties your hands to begin with. But I thought Society was amazing.
It's a film that I think was really misunderstood, and hopefully will get rediscovered. I hope it gets kind of the treatment some of yours have recently. Because
I think it has. I think it's people are really it was interesting that there was a poll that was just done. I just read about it in the best 100 horror films. No, this was done it was Time Out in Chicago actually, and Society came up. I think was higher ranked than Re-Animator was.
Oh wow!
So I think Society is getting its due.
I wouldn't quite agree with that in terms of quality, but in terms of like strange things that you'll never see. I mean, that's the cool thing about genre cinema is you can see things that you almost maybe couldn't even imagine occasionally. And Screaming Mad George achieved things that I think a lot of minds couldn't even imagine,
No, he's a surrealist for sure.
Yeah, it's really unique stuff.
But on the Lovecraft vein, I always liked using his Necronomicon too. The Book of the Dead.
I haven't seen it.
See, this is my thing about Usna films is so few of them have actually been released out on DVD and Blu-ray. But Necronomicon Book of the Dead never made it out.
But you had planned on returning at one point. You guys had the kind of White House Re-Animator story that a lot of people had heard about.
Yeah.
We got
House of Re-Animator.
We used to get that question over and over
that was probably
at Fangoria. It was on the chats at least once a week. What's going on with the White House Re-Animator?
Yeah. Well, we're still thinking about it.
But that obviously was partly very timely to do with
Bush
presidency.
It was very much about the Bush years.
We're getting back there.
Well, we are.
We're on our way, guys.
We are. And things are getting so crazy now. It's like, I think it's...
Well, as of the recording of this, we don't actually have a government, so if that helps. They're closed, but we're open.
Because as of January, I don't have health care.
There you go. But is that...
Well, you'll have health care. Yeah, you will.
I don't want to get into all political on here, but Aetna dropped all California residents as of January 1st because they said they couldn't compete with Obamacare.
Well, get Obamacare then.
Is it happening? I can't sign
up.
yet.
It's happening. Yes, it's happening, and you can sign up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been trying. I'm going to keep trying.
But is that an itch that was also somewhat like satisfied by, the return to the Re-Animator by the musical? Or do you really think there still could be another really fresh story with the...
Yeah, we have some ideas. I mean, we're kind of kicking around some ideas. So, yeah, I think you could do it.
Is Dennis still working at Hunter?
Yes.
I need to go back and give him a hug at some point.
Yeah, he would like that, I think.
He works in the writing center. So if you're a Hunter student, you can go get Dennis Paoli to help you write your papers.
Absolutely.
It's pretty amazing.
Well, this month is key to getting the word out. So if anyone's listening to this today, we would appreciate you guys retweet about this particular, both this show and also about what he's trying to achieve. They've got a long way to go.
Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And check out the video and make sure it's something you actually really want to put money in. Don't just do it because someone asking you. Yeah. Trust us when we say that this. I mean, I remember when I saw the show, the only reason I wanted it filmed was because I thought, man, every school on earth
needs to see
this
it.
would change their perception of his work.
Yeah,
And
totally.
any kid, any 16-year-old who popped that in would go, whoa. Who is, this character just seems so fascinating. So I feel like if you can achieve even half of that, intensity and beauty, it will be great. So, help him out. Hopefully I imagine you'll be appearing all over the place at least a little bit this month. Just, you have to get this out there.
Absolutely.
So,
and they're not asking for that much, $360,000.
$375,000.
Which, I mean, for a feature film.
Yeah, for a feature
is a great price. It's a great price.
Yeah. So. And off audio, we'll ask you what that would actually, how you came to that, how you're going to deliver.
That's an amazing rate for a film. So that's awesome.
But so please help us support it, and let's hope that this can be a film. If you get the money, how soon would you be planning like principal photography?
We're looking at next summer.
Okay, awesome.
Terrific. Where would you shoot at?
That's something we're thinking about. We're looking at
tax incentives.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this is...
Well, thank you for inviting me. This has been fun.
And I hope we're your first stop to come back when you get the money.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just the first scoop.
Exactly. All right, well, everyone, thanks for listening. And you'll hear us next week with who?
I don't want to give away the guest names, but it will be our soundtrack episode.
Okay.
For sure.
Soundtrack. And it has some relation to this episode?
Two completely different soundtrack people. Is it
Yeah,
really
we have two soundtrack people coming in back to back, don't we?
No, I put together two completely different guests, soundtrack related.
Oh, are they coming in at the same time?
Yes.
That's going to be a hell of a show.
Is it one related
to
to
these guys? I'm pretty psyched.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
All right, mystery.
Tune in.
Cool.
Like
See,
a Poe story.
That's how you do the mystery, right? Oh,
yeah, I don't even know what he's talking about.
In the middle of the show.
He just doesn't tell me who's coming until they show up. All right, well, thanks so much, Stuart, for joining us.
Thank you.
See you next week.
We'll talk next week.